Right, so cracking down on whistleblowing, it seems, will get you hired, when really it should ensure you're actually fired under the new regime of Keir Starmer. Forget any safety concerns you might have. Don't bother me with your foibles about people potentially getting hurt. Anyone who raises a warning about someone's conduct or a safety issue, it seems, ends up with a P45 at the end of the day. This isn't a regime that likes to be advised, you see. This is a regime that already likes to think it knows best. When it comes to public safety, though, any attempt to dismiss or bury significant issues without investigation or proper checks being done should be met with severest repercussions, especially where there is risk of severe injury or worse. In the world of Keir Starmer, it seems, well, that may not meet with any repercussions at all. It might even help you get a cushy government job instead. This is exactly what has happened to one whistleblower, the person who saw them sacked now a rail minister in Starmer's government, and they aren't the first to raise the alarm on an issue and get summarily ignored and dismissed for doing so either. Right, so when it comes to safety in public services, too often it has taken a whistleblower to expose wrongdoing and for heads to roll, and too often it has been the case that when they have been ignored, disaster has followed. Take Grenfell Tower, for example. Whistleblowers were warning of the cladding and the risks associated with its flammability before the fire and were ignored. Now we've seen a similar story in Dagenham, still under investigation right now, though again, non-compliant cladding, as the BBC put it, covered that building. Whistleblowers do the general public an enormous service. They expose wrongdoing by individuals or organisations, sometimes at great personal cost. Organisations and people that do not listen to concerns, do not act upon issues raised, do not care functionally, at the end of the day, if harm comes to someone or not. But this latest whistleblowing story is one of the nastiest examples I've yet come across. Not just because of the level of determination to not act upon warnings, but the lengths those responsible were prepared to go to, it seems, to not rectify the problem, but instead go after the person blowing the whistle. We've seen enough rail disasters over the years to know the dangers of ignoring safety concerns. Yet here we are, Starmer's Labour, seemingly rewarding that kind of conduct through the appointment of the unelected Labour peer, Lord Peter Hendy of Richmond Hill of Imber in the county of Wiltshire. That's quite the title for you, isn't it? And it's not as if this guy can plead ignorance over railways either, given he was the former chair of Network Rail, only stepping down from the role upon being appointed a minister by Keir Starmer last month. But what he did during his time in that role, and he was in that role for years, only a couple of months, though, before accepting the role Starmer offered him, though, is so petulant, it beggars belief. Starmer has recruited him, and it's actually not even the only nasty thing this guy has done in relation to rail. This story has come out via a Freedom of Information request in relation to what one independent journalist, as in the independent newspaper, Katie Rosinski, described as hell on earth, speaking as she was about Euston Station. A quick excerpt of her piece reading, "If hell exists, then surely it resembles the concourse at Euston Station. You stand, neck craned towards the departures board, squinting under artificial lights that seem perfectly calibrated to induce migraines. You dodge passengers who stampede like wildebeests towards platforms announced moments before trains are due to leave. Venture outside for air and it's grey as far as the eye can see. The concrete rectangle of the station, the equally drab units housing Pret and Nando's on the forecourt, the faces of the people freshly traumatised by their Euston experience. It is an ugly, smelly, joy-sapping experience. Absolute chaos, never again, one recent TripAdvisor review signs. Depressing and disgusting, another snappily sums it up." It's not good then by the sounds of it, is it? And it was very much that crowded atmosphere that was the cause of the whistle to be blown. And it was this same independent piece, dating back to only April of this year, that triggered this appalling story, because it was here that the whistleblower, an award-winning railway engineer, Gareth Dennis, he won the 2024 Young Rail Professional Distinguished Service Award, no less, stepped in with his own concerns, blew his whistle, so to speak, relating to Euston Station, getting Hendy's back up as he did so. Here's the relevant passage. One of the biggest issues, Dennis suggests, is that the volume of trains going in and out of Euston has vastly increased since then, but the station itself hasn't grown in tandem. The station is still the same size that carried 6 times fewer trains a day, he says. It needs to be literally double the size it is to deal with the number of passengers. HS2 and even Crossrail 2, he argues, might have taken some of that pressure off. Plus shops and cafes have encroached on the floor space, the newish mezzanine level where you can pick up a Leon wrap while surveying the frazzled passengers below only enhances the sense of claustrophobia. All of a sudden, that station that once felt large and airy feels like a small shed, Dennis adds. And when multiple trains are delayed or cancelled, you're talking about thousands of people squished into that space. It's not just uncomfortable, it's not just unpleasant, it's unsafe. It was that last line that did it for Hendy, it seems. How dare this railway engineer determine the station is unsafe? Well, he is an engineer. He should know his stuff. And frankly, I trust him a lot more than I trust you, Lord Hendy. But Hendy was having none of it. He fired off a letter to Dennis's boss, the CEO Nick Salt at Sistra UK Limited, who Dennis worked for, a rail and transport infrastructure firm that enjoys getting lovely network rail contracts. And this was sent back in May, the month after the Indie article came out, which read, "Dear Mr. Salt, I am writing to you about a serious allegation that one of your employees has made about Network Rail in the media. In this piece about Euston Station in The Independent, railway engineer Gareth Dennis tells the journalists that it's not just uncomfortable, it's not just unpleasant, it's unsafe. Euston Station is by no means perfect, but the allegation that Network Rail is running an unsafe operation is a serious one for a safety-critical business, as I'm sure you appreciate. Gareth Dennis is a Sistra employee, so he must write with your authority. Please let me know what evidence you have to substantiate his allegation, or alternatively, what action you are taking if what he alleges is not your company's view. Employees here know what they say in the media reflects on their employment, and I should like confirmation that your employees understand that too. And of course, finding a potential supplier criticising a possible client reflects adversely on your likelihood of doing business with us or our supply chain. I look forward to hearing from you. Peter, Lord Hendy of Richmond Hill." So in other words, Network Rail employees are not apparently permitted to have opinions of their own. It'll be tied to their employment if they choose to make such opinions public, at any rate. Hendy also expects that of other transport companies and suppliers of goods or services to have that same view as he evidently has, demands evidence of that from Sistra in this instance, and effectively threatens the chances of any of these said companies getting any further Network Rail contracts if he doesn't like what he hears. That's how I'm reading that. Am I wrong? Quite the piece of work, Lord Hendy, in which case. But then, this is the guy who was chair of Network Rail recommended to the Tories in 2016 in their, at that point, review of their planned Access for All scheme to make railways more accessible, they claimed, that the £50 million allocated for that scheme should be delayed by a further 3 years, incensing disability campaigners at the same time. In fact, last September, the Office of Rail and Road, the ORR, sent Network Rail an improvement notice about overcrowding at, guess where? Yes, Euston Station, and demanded risks there and take steps to mitigate them. Now, as Rail Minister, Hendy is now in charge of the ORR and kicking off at a young engineer who pointed out the same issues, though Network Rail claimed they had been addressed. The quote published in Squawk Box relating to this story reading, "You have failed to implement, so far as reasonably practicable, effective measures to prevent risks to health and safety of passengers and other persons at the station during passenger surges and overcrowding events at London Euston Station. As for whether Network Rail did make good on these issues, well, the Department for Transport, funnily enough, has refused to comment." Nick Salt, Sistra's UK CEO, originally apologised to Hendy in light of his letter for those comments made, but Hendy was not having it and told Sistra that if the matter was not dealt with satisfactorily, he would be taking it up with their head office and their shareholders. Gareth Dennis was suspended and subsequently sacked on 4 weeks' notice after refusing to sign a secrecy agreement in exchange for a bigger payoff. The story stinks to high heaven. A guy who put rail user safety first by highlighting concerns gets sacked for doing it. And the guy who kicked off about these comments rather than taking them on board or investigating them, after they'd already been raised by the ORR at that, is now in charge of the ORR and demanding people get sacked for blowing the whistle and is prepared to threaten their employers over access to, well, their contracts over such issues. It's all there in black and white, so the big question right now is for Keir Starmer and whether or not he thinks this is acceptable behaviour that deserves to be rewarded, behaviour behooving of a government minister. But then we can all hazard a guess at that, I suppose. For example, a whistleblower over the exploitation of Muslim domestic violence victims through a charity she ran being committed by a Labour Party staffer went ignored. She ended up being sacked. She ended up successfully taking her then employer in the party at that time, the now thankfully former Labour MP Khalid Mahmood, to tribunal for unfair dismissal and then won. And when one of his own Muslim MPs was a victim of domestic violence herself, Keir Starmer left her with no support from her party either. That's the Labour MP for Poplar and Limehouse, Afsana Begum. Legal advice pertaining to the alleged indecent misconduct of a right-wing Labour council leader was ignored so that he could be reinstated to be able to then stand for Parliament for Keir Starmer, and he is now not only the MP for Ilford South but also now Parliament's biggest landlord. Whistleblowing is clearly frowned upon in Starmer's Labour, so I suppose Peter Hendy, in which case, is safe as houses in his new role. Your safety on the railways, though, seems that might well be quite another matter. This is just one more example in a whole litany of examples adding to Keir Starmer's scandalised, dishonest government, contributing to their polling going into absolute freefall, deservedly. And it seems like every day a new scandal emerges. So what will it be tomorrow, do you think? Well, you'll no doubt get the details of it here on this channel. Get the details of those polling woes and this video recommendation here in the meantime, though, for your next watch. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.